Pull over on a deserted highway to help a homeless man with his broken-down car? Most people would drive right past. But Emma wasn't most people. As she handed him a wrench, their fingers brushed, and that's when she saw it. The military ring on his finger made her blood run cold. It was identical to the one her grandmother kept locked away. The one that belonged to the man who saved her grandfather's life in Vietnam. This wasn't just a random encounter. This forgotten hero was living out of his car, while the mayor's family controlled the town with their wealth. What Emma discovers next will expose a 40-year conspiracy that destroyed this man's life, stole his daughter away, and buried the truth about her own family's past. And the town's powerful will do anything to keep it hidden. The sun beat down hard on the old highway that snaked its way past the small town. It was a scorching summer day, the kind where the air itself felt heavy. Emma Carter was just finishing her late shift at the local diner. She wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead as she climbed into her old, trusty pickup truck. The engine rumbled to life, a familiar sound that always brought her a bit of comfort. As she drove, her eyes scanned the heat-hazed road. That's when she saw it. A thin plume of smoke curling up from the side of the road ahead. An old car, a Chevy from the 1970s by the looks of it, was pulled over, its hood up. Beside it, an older black man paced back and forth. He looked stressed, his shoulders slumped, his face etched with worry. Emma slowed her truck and pulled over a little ways in front of him. She hopped out, her worn work boots kicking up a little dust. "Everything all right there?" she called out, her voice friendly. The man stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes wary. He was clearly homeless, his clothes worn and his belongings likely packed into the old car. "I'm fine, ma'am," he said, his voice a bit rough, trying to wave her off. But Emma wasn't easily swayed. She'd grown up around cars, helping her Uncle Joe in his garage since she was a kid. She could see the frustration in the man's eyes, the kind that came from things just not going right. "Looks like you might have a bit of trouble," Emma said gently, already walking towards her truck bed. She grabbed her toolbox, a familiar weight in her hand. "Mind if I take a look? I'm pretty handy with engines." The man hesitated, clearly not used to kindness from strangers. As Emma started to work, a quiet understanding began to form, the kind of connection that, if you enjoy seeing unfold, you might want to subscribe to see more stories like this one. He watched her, uneasy at first, as she calmly checked under the hood. The heat was intense, but Emma focused on the task. "Just a loose hose, looks like," she said after a few minutes. "And maybe an overheated radiator. Got any water?" He shook his head mutely. Emma sighed and went back to her truck, pulling out a jug of water and some coolant she always kept for emergencies. As she worked, she tried to make small talk. "So, what brings you through our little town?" The man was quiet for a long moment, then said, almost to himself, "Just passing. Used to fix bigger things than this a long time ago." His words were vague but held a hint of a past he didn't want to share. Emma didn't push. She handed him a wrench. As their hands brushed, her eyes fell on his finger. He wore a ring, a thick, masculine band. It was a military ring. Emma's eyes widened slightly as she made out faded initials etched into its side. A memory flashed in Emma's mind. Her grandmother, years ago, showing her a small, velvet-lined box. Inside, nestled amongst old sepia-tone photographs, was a ring. A ring that looked just like the one on this stranger's hand. Her grandmother had pointed to a smiling young soldier in one of the photos, standing beside Emma's own grandfather, also in uniform. "This man," her grandmother had said, her voice soft with reverence, "he saved your grandfather's life during the war. They were like brothers." Emma had never forgotten that story or the image of the ring. Back on the roadside, Emma tried to keep her voice even, her curiosity carefully hidden. She tightened a clamp, then looked at Bobby. "That's an interesting ring," she said, trying to sound casual. "Where do you serve, if you don't mind me asking?" Bobby looked down at his hand, a flicker of something, pride? Pain? In his eyes. He named an elite unit, one known for its bravery and tough missions. It was the same unit her grandfather had served in. Her heart began to beat a little faster. "My grandfather," Emma said slowly, "he served in that unit too. During Vietnam." Bobby's head snapped up, his gaze sharp and searching. "What was his name?" he asked, his voice suddenly stronger. Emma told him. A slow look of recognition spread across Bobby's face, followed by a deep sadness. I knew him, Bobby said, his voice thick with emotion. We were close. He was a good man. He paused, the memories seeming to flood back. Then a shadow crossed his features. This town, he said, his voice growing bitter, it betrayed us after the war. We were promised things. Land. A chance to build a life. He gestured vaguely towards the fields beyond the highway. But it was all taken away. Lost my land, never got my pension. They just forgot about us. He looked down at his worn clothes, his beat-up car. Now I'm just forgotten. Living out of this old van. Emma felt a wave of empathy wash over her. This man, this hero who had served alongside her grandfather, who had possibly even saved his life, was now homeless, abandoned by the very community he had fought to protect. A quiet determination began to grow inside her. She couldn't just fix his car and let him drive away. This felt like something more, something important. She had to help him. She finished up with the car, the engine now running smoother. There, she said. That should hold for a good while. But listen, there's a good mechanic in town, my uncle. Maybe you could follow me there? He could give it a proper look over. Bobby looked at her, suspicion still in his eyes, but also a glimmer of something else. Hope, perhaps. He nodded slowly. As soon as Emma got home, she headed straight for the old wooden chest in the attic where her grandmother kept her most precious memories. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the heavy lid. There it was, the small velvet box. Inside, alongside the faded photographs, was the identical military ring. And beneath it, a stack of old documents, letters, copies of what looked like land deeds, and more photographs of young soldiers, their faces full of hope and youthful confidence. She spread them out on the dusty floor, her mind racing. Could it be? Just then, the attic door creaked open and her Uncle Joe's head appeared. He was a kind man, his face weathered from years of working in his garage and from his own time serving in Vietnam. Emma? What are you doing up here, stirring up all this dust? He asked, a smile in his voice. Then he saw what she had spread out on the floor. His smile faded. He walked over slowly, his eyes fixed on the ring and the photographs. He picked up one of the pictures, his expression unreadable. That man, he said, his voice quiet, pointing to the soldier beside her grandfather. That's Bobby Grant. Robert Grant. He and your granddad, they were brothers in arms. Went through hell together. Emma looked at him, her eyes wide. Uncle Joe, I met him today. His car broke down on the highway. He's homeless. Uncle Joe's face hardened. The weight of this hidden history settled heavily in the small attic room. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? We'd love to know where you're watching from as this story of a small town's secrets unfolds. Uncle Joe sat down heavily on an old trunk. I'm not surprised, he said, his voice grim. He then began to tell her the story, a story that had been buried for decades. After the war, he explained, the government granted several veterans in this area plots of land. Your granddad got some, and so did Bobby. It was supposed to be a fresh start for them. He paused, his jaw tightening. But Mayor Denton's father, Old Man Denton, he was a snake. He was just starting to build his power back then. He wanted that land for himself. He used bribes, fake legal papers, anything he could to steal those deeds from the veterans. Most of them were too tired from the war or didn't have the means to fight him. Emma listened, a cold anger rising within her. Bobby Grant, Uncle Joe continued, he was different. He tried to protest. He fought back. But Old Man Denton had the town in his pocket even then. They ran Bobby out of town, called him a troublemaker. Took everything from him. Emma looked down at the deeds in her hand, her grandmother's carefully preserved copies. But we have proof, she exclaimed, her voice trembling with fury. These are copies of the original deeds. His name is on them. Uncle Joe nodded slowly. Yes, he said. But Denton, the son, he's just like his father. He's powerful now. Controls the town council, the police. It won't be easy to fight him. Emma knew she couldn't let this rest. The next day, she arranged to meet Bobby secretly at her uncle's garage. Uncle Joe had already spoken to Bobby, vouched for Emma, and offered him a safe place to stay for a few nights. When Bobby arrived, he looked a little cleaner, a little less haunted, but the weariness was still etched deep in his face. Emma took a deep breath and laid out the contents of her grandmother's box on a clean workbench. The matching ring, the photographs, the copies of the deeds. Bobby stared at them, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch the ring. Then a photograph of himself as a young man, standing tall and proud next to Emma's grandfather. Tears welled in his eyes. I thought all this was gone, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. I thought no one remembered. He looked at Emma, a dawning understanding in his gaze. Your grandfather, he kept these? Emma nodded. My grandmother did. She never forgot what you did for him, for all of them. Encouraged by Emma's support, Bobby began to open up more, the years of pain and silence slowly giving way. He told her about his wife, who had died young, her spirit broken by the shame and poverty that followed the loss of their land and his reputation. And then, the most heartbreaking part of his story, his daughter, Sarah. She was just a little girl when they took her, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Social services said I couldn't provide. They took her away. I heard she got adopted by a family in the city. I never saw her again. He confessed that Sarah now worked in city government, completely unaware of her father's true story or even that he was still alive and so close. Emma listened, her heart aching for him. The injustice was staggering. But now they had a chance, a small one, but a chance nonetheless. We have to do something, Bobby, Emma said, her voice firm with a newfound resolve. We have to expose what happened. We have to get your story out there. A plan began to form in her mind. The next town hall meeting, she said. Mayor Denton will be there. We can present this evidence publicly. Bobby looked scared, but a spark of hope, long dormant, seemed to flicker in his eyes. Meanwhile, Uncle Joe, moved by Bobby's plight and Emma's determination, started making quiet calls. He reached out to other veterans in the area, old friends who remembered Bobby Grant, men who had also felt the sting of broken promises. They listened to Joe's story, and they agreed. They would be there. They would stand with Bobby. The days leading up to the town hall meeting were a blur of activity for Emma. She dug deeper, determined to find every piece of evidence she could. She spent hours at the local library, poring over old newspaper clippings. She found articles from decades ago, vaguely mentioning land disputes and unsettled claims by veterans, all quickly hushed up. She even managed to track down old VA documents that clearly showed Bobby Grant's rightful claim to the land and the benefits he had been denied. Each discovery felt like another piece of a painful puzzle clicking into place. While Emma focused on the evidence, Uncle Joe took on another, more delicate task. He managed to track down Sarah Grant. He didn't tell her everything, not yet. He simply invited her to the town hall meeting, saying there was something important about the town's history she needed to hear, something that might concern her family. Sarah, curious and a little puzzled, agreed to come. She had no idea what awaited her. Emma also focused on Bobby. She knew he needed to feel like himself again, not the forgotten man he had become. She took him to a barber, helped him find some clean, respectable clothes. She even gave him one of her grandfather's old jackets, a simple, well-made coat that fit him surprisingly well. As Bobby looked at himself in the mirror, clean-shaven, his hair neatly trimmed, wearing the jacket of his old friend, a flicker of the proud soldier he once was returned to his eyes. Still, he was nervous. They won't believe me, Emma, he said, his voice heavy with doubt. I'm just a homeless old black vet. Denton will paint me as a liar, a crazy man. Emma put a reassuring hand on his arm. They will believe you, Bobby, she said, her voice full of conviction. They will when they see the truth. When they hear your story. Tension began to build in the small town as the day of the meeting approached. Mayor Charles Denton, a man who always had his ear to the ground, started to catch wind that something was stirring. Whispers reached him about Emma Carter asking too many questions about old veterans gathering. He grew uneasy, though he couldn't quite pinpoint what was coming. He just knew he didn't like it. He prided himself on controlling his town, and any disruption to his carefully managed image was a threat. The town hall was packed. Every seat was taken and people stood along the walls. Mayor Denton was at the podium, beaming, pleased with the turnout. He was in the middle of announcing his grand new plan for a community park development, a project he touted as a sign of progress for their small town. The land he was referring to was, of course, the very land that had been stolen from Bobby and the other veterans decades ago. Just as Denton was waxing lyrical about green spaces and community benefit, Emma Carter stood up. Her voice, clear and steady, cut through the mayor's speech. Excuse me, Mayor Denton, she said. But this land you're talking about, it was never yours to sell. It was never your family's to develop. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to Emma. Mayor Denton's smile faltered, replaced by a look of irritation. Miss Carter, this is hardly the time or place for. But Emma continued, her voice gaining strength. She held up her grandmother's ring, then gestured to Bobby, who was standing quietly near the back, supported by Uncle Joe and a small group of other elderly veterans. "This ring," Emma declared, "belonged to my grandfather. And this man, Mr. Robert Grant, wears its twin." She then walked Bobby forward. As she held the two rings side by side, a gasp went through the crowd, especially from the older residents and the veterans in the audience who recognized the insignia. Emma then laid out the evidence on a table she'd prepared. The faded deeds with Bobby's name clearly visible, signed affidavits from other veterans who remembered the land grants, and the old photographs of Bobby with her grandfather. Bobby Grant then stepped forward. He was nervous, but as he looked at Emma's encouraging face, he found his voice. "My name is Robert Grant," he said, his voice raspy at first, then growing stronger. "I served this country. I served with this town's own heroes. And this town's leadership, took everything from me." Public shock rippled through the hall. Many people had never seen Bobby before, or if they had, they dismissed him as just another nameless homeless man. At that moment, the door at the back of the hall opened and Sarah Grant walked in, looking around, trying to figure out why she'd been invited. Her eyes scanned the room, then froze as they landed on Bobby. She stared, her face a mask of disbelief and confusion. Mayor Denton, red-faced and flustered, tried to regain control. "This is outrageous," he blustered. "This man is a vagrant. A liar trying to stir up trouble." But before he could say more, one by one, the veterans in the audience began to stand. "We remember him," one old soldier called out. "He's telling the truth," another added. The crowd, initially stunned, began to murmur. They looked from Bobby's earnest, pained face to Mayor Denton's increasingly panicked one. The tide was turning. The pressure was mounting. The fallout from the town hall meeting was immediate and explosive. Local news reporters, sensing a major story, had been present, and they pounced on the revelations. The story of the stolen land, the forgotten veteran, and the corrupt mayor spread like wildfire. Within days, state investigators were called in. Mayor Charles Denton, faced with irrefutable evidence of land fraud, forgery, and a decades-long cover-up initiated by his father, was arrested. His carefully constructed world of power and influence came crashing down. Amidst the chaos and the headlines, something quiet and beautiful happened. Bobby and Sarah finally met, truly met. After the meeting, Emma had gently introduced them. The reunion was hesitant at first, filled with years of unspoken questions and unhealed wounds. But as Bobby, with Emma's quiet support, told Sarah his story, the truth of his life, the walls between them began to crumble. They embraced, a long, emotional hug that spoke of loss, regret, and the tentative beginnings of hope and reconnection. Tears flowed freely, washing away some of the bitterness of the lost years. The town, shamed by the injustice that had occurred in its midst, began to make amends. The veterans, so long overlooked, were finally honored at a special city memorial. Their service and sacrifices were acknowledged, and Bobby Grant's name was spoken with the respect it deserved. The courts moved swiftly. The fraudulent deeds were nullified, and the land ownership was restored to Bobby Grant and, through her grandfather's share, to Emma's family. The public outcry was so strong that it forced the town council, now free from Denton's corrupt influence, to pass new veterans protection laws, ensuring that such an injustice could never happen again in their community. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived, carried on the back of a simple act of kindness and the courage to speak the truth. 1 year later, the land that had once been a symbol of betrayal and forgotten promises had been transformed. It was now home to the Veterans Community Center and Memorial Park. The center offered resources, support, and a place of belonging for veterans from all walks of life. The park was a quiet, beautiful space for reflection, honoring those who had served. Emma Carter, her passion for mechanics now combined with her dedication to her community, ran a small garage on the edge of the center's property. She offered free car repairs for veterans in need and trained young vets in automotive skills, giving them a new sense of purpose. Robert, Bobby Grant, no longer lived in his old van. He had a small, comfortable apartment nearby and spent his days at the community center. He lived with dignity, his past acknowledged, his future hopeful. He found a new calling in counseling other homeless veterans, sharing his story and helping them navigate the system that had once failed him so badly. Sarah Grant, inspired by her father's journey and her own new understanding of the challenges facing veterans, had started a nonprofit organization dedicated to veterans advocacy. She worked tirelessly to ensure their rights were protected and their voices heard. In the heart of the new memorial park, on a simple stone wall dedicated to unity and remembrance, 2 identical military rings were displayed side by side, encased in glass. They were a permanent reminder of a bond between soldiers, of a promise nearly broken, and of a community that had learned the hard way about justice and reconciliation. Sometimes a simple act of kindness reclaims justice lost for generations. The story of Emma and Bobby shows how one kind act can change so much. Their rings, now a symbol of hope, remind us that justice can be found. If stories like this, where the underdog finds their voice and forgotten heroes are remembered, touch your heart, there are many more waiting for you. Check out the playlist in the comments below for more tales of courage and community.